A Tennessee state lawmaker decided that maybe it's a good idea to give the homeless people in the state some inspiration by referencing an individual who actually murdered millions. I'm not kidding. Here is the video featuring Senator Frank Niceley, a Republican from the state of Tennessee.
I want to give you a little history on homelessness. 1910, Hitler decided to live on the streets for a while. So for 2 years, Hitler lived on the streets and practiced his oratory and his body language and how to connect with masses, and then went on to lead a life that got him in the history books. So a lot of these people, it's not a dead end. They can come out of these homeless camps and have a productive life, or in Hitler's case, a very unproductive life. I support this bill.
I just don't understand how anyone could think that that is the right person to reference as a potential inspiration to people who are experiencing homelessness. And to also specifically mention that Hitler made it in the history books. Like, yeah, but what did he make it in the history books for? Anyway, I'll give you more details about what's transpiring in Tennessee, because they're trying to criminalize poverty and homelessness, and it's pretty gross. But before we get to that, Dr. Ritchie, thoughts on Frank Niceley, who does not have an appropriate last name?
He's a dumbass and he's racist. So here's the thing. I have never in my life, and Anna, I've heard a lot of crazy things, especially from the right. But his whole message was, if Hitler can do it, you can too. I have never heard anyone say the inside part out loud, because we know many of them subscribe to the ideology of Hitler. But he let the inside part go outside. And I think what happened, Anna, I believe he caught himself at the end.
Yes.
And he tried to clean it up slightly, but he feels Hitler, all right? He's a Hitler guy all the way. But once again, it shows you the culture and the atmosphere that permeates around elected officials today, where their bias is front and center. And to be quite honest with you, Anna, I actually prefer it this way, because when they are cloaked, it's very difficult to understand their bias and to expose them. But Jim Crow never went anywhere. Now you just got Jim Crow Esquire. Jim Crow knows how to put on a suit. Jim Crow knows how to hold a press conference. So it still exists. It is still here, still prevalent. But the issue that impacts us all is that these individuals are in policy-making authority. They actually not only create policy, they influence policy, and their bias is so indoctrinated, there is no way that their policy lacks it. So that's why it's important to all of us.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I appreciate the transparency, because I remember a time when, and it was before the Trump era, when we were covering the police brutality stories, when we were covering, all these stories pertaining to racism, discrimination, and there would always be some portion of the viewers, not our actual audience, but people who would come across our content, the argument that, no, we've combated all of this, we've got a black president, let's move on. And it would infuriate me, because it was just this flat out rejection of a reality in America. Now it's real hard to deny that reality when you have people who say the quiet parts out loud. But there's also a downside to that. And the downside is, unfortunately, it galvanized some of these people who believed the same things, but were kind of hiding in the shadows because it was so taboo to just openly admit how much hatred you have for certain groups of people in the country.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It's always a double-edged sword. But here's what's happening with racists in America. Because of our inability to deal with it authentically in this country, racist people have always been here. The Confederate never went away because the ideology continued to remain. If you go in southern states, it looks like the Confederate won the war, all right? Why is that? Because they wanted the psychology to remain intact. They wanted to teach the history by having statues and military installations and streets named after racist killers and racist rapers. They wanted this, rapists. They wanted this because it allowed their culture to continue. But this is their last stand, Anna. This is their last stand. It's like a guy who's gasping for breath, and they're doing everything they can do to remain relevant and survive. They're not willing to change. They're not willing to transform. And so you see them coming out of the woodwork because this is, in my opinion, the last opportunity for this country to redefine its very soul, its very DNA. And if we don't do it here at this crossroad, this country is going to take a turn that will not be able to change.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. I do want to also talk about what prompted the statements that we heard from Senator Frank Niceley. They were debating a bill that would ban homeless encampments. And so by the way, I want to give you some of his other statements, including one in 2009. He and 3 other Tennessee Republican lawmakers joined a legal effort to try to force President Barack Obama to turn over his birth certificate. Gee, I wonder why. In order to prove that he was born in the United States. Niceley contended at the time that some of Obama's Kenyan relatives said the president was born in that country. And in 2017, he told E&E News that carbon dioxide emissions, of which are a major driver of climate change, is not a pollutant. It's just as natural as oxygen. Great, he should breathe it. Go ahead and see what happens, since it's such a wonderful, it's as natural as the oxygen. It's great. Now, I do want to get to SB 1610. That's the legislation they were debating. It would classify camping on public property as a misdemeanor, punishable by a $50 fine or community service work. So let's pause for a second. This is what I don't understand, okay? I do understand wanting to do something about encampments. I understand that, okay? But criminalizing them they're homeless, so you can fine them all you want. What do you think is gonna happen with that fine? But more importantly, okay, you wanna ban homeless encampments. Are you offering shelter, or are you just like, what are they supposed to do if they have nowhere to go? Like, we need an answer to that, right? You can't just move people around you get what I'm saying? Like, I just don't. And we see a little bit of this in California where, some people are offered housing, they might refuse it. And I do have a problem with that, just keeping it real. But if you don't offer housing, you should not be forcing people, or you shouldn't be criminalizing people for living on the streets. They have nowhere to go.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And here's the thing, poverty exists because of policy. This policy exists because of capitalism. Capitalism requires, it mandates that you have a permanent underclass in order for capitalism to actually thrive. So let's go back to the genesis of all of this. The genesis of this is about how we value or express the lack thereof as it relates to humanity. That's what this is about. Policy is typically the social or the government contract between community and government, right? So policy says, here's how we're supposed to treat you. Well, good policy solves problems. Bad policy simply kicks it down the road. This is a bad policy because, as you said, Anna, if an individual is homeless, think about the insanity of these people. Think about how crazy it is for someone to create a policy to tell a homeless person, you now have to pay money. Hell, they can't even pay money to have somewhere to live or eat.
Right.
But they're gonna pay your fee. You're setting them up for failure intentionally. Now, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to fold under the pressure? Do you want them to commit suicide? Do you want them to just commit a crime and get locked up for the rest of their lives? You're forcing them into crimes of survival now. That's what you're doing, because all they're attempting to do is live. And these particular crimes, or quote unquote crimes, have been dealt with by some progressive leaders in particular cities around the country, where they're trying to solve the underlying issues. There are some jails, Anna, 80% of the individuals inside of them are there because of a mental health issue, an underlying addiction connected to drugs or alcohol, or some level of crime of survival. If that's trespassing because they need somewhere to live, stealing food because they needed something to eat, 80%. That's a policy problem. You can fix that through good policy. These individuals don't value human life enough if that human life does not have a certain status. And that's what you see unfolding in front of us.
Well, you don't see that unfolding in Tennessee. The bill, which was later approved by the state Senate on a 22-10 vote, now heads to Republican Governor Bill Lee's desk. It comes after the state made camping on state property a felony offense in 2020.
Insane.
The bill enables local law enforcement offices to punish people who are homeless at their discretion, with the fine not being mandatory. It also allows for a citation for the first offense. Now, critics are understandably and correctly concerned about how this will actually make it far more difficult for people to get back on their own 2 feet, because if you're now dealing with a felony, the likelihood of you getting hired, getting gainful employment is incredibly difficult. And also, we should take a look at what kind of housing is available, because it turns out not much. So the city's population of unsheltered people, this is the last graphic. The city's population of unsheltered people has grown 80% since 2020, with about 350 people sleeping in Chattanooga's streets each night. Meanwhile, all of the city's 469 permanent supportive housing beds are full, meaning that there are no other options for these people, okay? Each year, 80 beds open up, but 300 to 400 chronically homeless individuals are in need of those beds each year, meaning the city's resources lack the capacity to house them. So that is the city's failure, okay? That is the state's failure. That is it, you're right. It is a policy failure. So if the lawmakers are failing at offering or providing solutions to something that leads to pain and misery and homelessness, they can't then turn around, add insult to injury to the very people who are out on the streets thanks to policy failures that they engaged in the first place.
You know, I want to say something to those who proclaim to be people of faith. The folks who are passing these policies that are adversarial to common sense and humanity, I bet you they go to church. I bet they go to somebody's Bible study. Now, I'm a Christian man personally, that's my faith tradition. But God gave me a brain before he gave me a book, and I use it. I use my brain quite well. I want to say this to any Christian or any person of faith who believes this is a good policy. Don't forget that Jesus, Yahshua, was an unarmed man of color. Okay, Jesus, Yahshua, was homeless. He was an immigrant. He would be an immigrant here. There was a time in the scripture that highlights a conversation where Jesus said, thank you for clothing me when I was naked, for feeding me when I was hungry. His disciples said, oh, you tripping. We never did any of that for you. And he said, yeah, but when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Now, the reason I bring this up is because the folks who are passing these laws, the individuals in charge of writing these policies, proclaim that they subscribe to a value system held by that same man. He said, when you do it to the least of these, in the Koine Greek, that means those who are of unequal status to others. You did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Why do we not see the personification of people's faith in these policies? Why don't we see that? Why is it that every time we see a religious bill, Anna, or a religious person passing a bill, is always antithetical to humanity? And then those of us on the other side, the progressive side, which includes my atheist brothers and sisters, we're the ones fighting the so-called Christians to try to bring a value system that makes sense for actual humanity.
Yeah, this country was founded with Calvinist values.
Yep.
And I think that informs a lot of the ideology that we see when it comes to these types of cases, because they don't see individuals who are unhoused as a policy failure on their part. They see it as a problem that the individuals on the street have brought onto themselves, because whatever, they see it as a personal failing for the people living in poverty. That's what they've been conditioned and trained to think. That is how they're able to sleep at night, because they've rationalized what they're seeing on the streets in their own state. They've rationalized that pain and suffering. And instead of taking personal responsibility as lawmakers, they've instead decided to point to people, who are honestly the most powerless in society and say, it's your fault. In fact, if you just work hard enough, like Hitler, according to this state senator, maybe you can pick yourself up by the bootstraps. But that argument is also incredibly dominant in parts of the country where manufacturing jobs were shipped abroad, where you look at the Rust Belt, for instance. And really, is that a personal failure for people living in poverty, or is it how the market works?
Right. And why is it that we never flip the conversation, right, to a multimillionaire, billionaire who says they don't want to pay their fair share in taxes, right? Well, wait a minute. I think you need to work harder, Mr. Billionaire. I think you need to pull yourself up by your bootstrap. I think you need to own less yachts, spend less money on vacation and vacation homes. You have to do this for you. Just work harder and everything will work out for you. But we accept the complaints of the millionaires and the billionaires in ways we reject as it relates to those who are in poverty.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.